Hello, welcome to the eScalate Programme Grant Application webinar. I'm James Ruel, I'm the OxLEP Compliance Consultant. I'm recording this on the 11th of February 2022 for what we believe will be the final round of the eScalate grant scheme. Give you a brief overview of the agenda. We're going to go through the eScalate programme and the grants process itself, cover eligibility to apply for and to receive a grant, the process, how to apply, the different rules that we need to follow, the key dates in the process, and then lastly, I will present a few slides on why applications are unsuccessful. Some people in the audience may well have heard me talk about those before. If you've attended any other grant webinars in the past, you will have heard me talk through those slides. And if you have any questions and answers, the place to email them is the escalate@oxfordshirelep.com email address. So if you send those there, the team will pick them up, reply to them and add them to the frequently asked questions section of the OxLEP website. So first of all, a little bit about OxLEP and OxLEP Business. OxLEP is the Oxfordshire Local Enterprise Partnership, which is one of a network of around about 30 local enterprise partnerships across the whole of England. Within the LEP, OxLEP Business is the part that deals primarily with business and economic growth and supporting businesses in all things other than skills, which is the domain of the skills team. And the growth hub within OxLEP is the part responsible for delivering that business support to businesses. I think the first thing that I really need to say right at the beginning, before I even talk about any of the projects, is, as you'll notice, this is European funded. It's funded through the European Regional Development Fund, hence the logo in the top of the screen. As a result of the UK's departure from the European Union, you may expect there to have been some changes to the eScalate programme as its European funding. What are those changes? The short answer is none. Nothing has changed. As part of the exit from the European Union, the programmes remain part of the European Structural Investment Fund programme until they close down. Therefore, they continue to be governed by the EU regulations and by the UK Managing Authority's guidance and interpretation of those regulations. So effectively, from the point of view of eScalate, nothing has changed as a result of the UK's departure from the EU. So what is the eScalate programme? eScalate has, as you can see from the little image, three different elements. There is support for enterprises for social good. So that's businesses that have a social purpose, things like social enterprises, charities, that sort of thing. There's support for scale-up businesses. So this is access to finance and investment readiness support for businesses that are looking to obtain investment and grow quickly. There's also the eScalate grants element, which are cash grants matched by the businesses at 1-to-1. So for your total costs, you receive half of the money back as a grant. And those grants are available both for enterprises for the social good and for the scale-up businesses for access to finance and investment readiness. Grants being the subject of this recording. In terms of the timeline, it's been quite a long time since we ran an eScalate call for grants. We are able to do so again because the programme has been extended. So that's allowed us to put in an additional grant round. It does, however, mean that there are some short time scales for the delivery of projects. So that's projects need to be completed and claimed in September this year, 2022. And we don't anticipate that there will be a further round of eScalate grants. The cut-off date for this round is actually exactly a month away from the point of recording, midday on the 11th of March, 2022. And we will aim to notify all applicants, whether they've been successful or unsuccessful, on or before the 1st of April 2022. If that timescale is likely to slip, so if we are swamped with applications, for example, and we just can't get through them all in that 3-week window, we will notify all applicants that there's been a delay and tell you what the revised notification date is. So please don't worry if you haven't heard from us on the 30th of March. It just means that the process is running through. If, however, you've applied and you've heard nothing come the 2nd of April, that's the point at which you can chase the team. But you will have heard something by then. And a note for anyone who's attended these webinars before, been familiar with the process, we're not able, due to internal resourcing position, to be able to offer the soft check proofreading service that we were able to do at previous rounds. So I guess the key question on everyone's lips is going to be how much is available. So for this final round, we have £42,000 of grant money available. Okay, so that's £42,000 of grant we can award, which will be matched by the businesses who apply with another £42,000 of their own money. The minimum grant that we can award is £1,000. So that gives you a total project cost of £2,000, 50% grant, 50% match. And the maximum grant that we're going to be giving out this time round is £12,500. This is to ensure that a range of organisations have the opportunity to be successful in this round, and we're not in the position of awarding, say, 2 projects, which might have used up the entire budget. So this time we'll be funding at least 4 projects, at most, and I'm sure it won't be this, but at most 42 projects. But I think it's very unlikely that we'll receive that many projects around about the £1,000 mark. The grant rate, as I've mentioned, is 50%. So it is exactly 1-to-1. For every £1 that you put in of match funding, we will pay £1 in grant out. So what is the eligibility for eScalate? So before I talk about technical things like small and medium-sized enterprise criteria, I'm going to talk about the types of business that fall within scope of the eScalate program. First of all, there are the scale-ups. So when we talk about scale-ups, we're talking about businesses that are in the development and growth stage that, for the purposes of eScalate, are looking to access finance or are looking to become investment ready as a result of the grant or support that eScalate gives them. To be a scale-up, you should have one of the following growth characteristics. So either 20% growth each year in terms of number of employees by turnover, or both employees and turnover, or to have that growth potential. So you can have the potential to grow by 20% each year, either employees, turnover, or both. And of course, you then have to describe how access to the support, or in this case, a grant, would help to achieve this level of growth. The other side of the eScalate program, the enterprises for social good. This includes enterprising charities, social enterprises, social entrepreneurs, and really any business that is purposeful. So if your organisation can declare at least one of those 3 arrowed bullet points on the slide is true, then you will fall into the category of an enterprise for social good. So that is that you were established to enable a positive social or environmental change. You're committed to reinvesting the principal part of profits and income towards social or environmental objectives, and that you're a purpose-driven company, ensuring that all stakeholders are treated equally, striving for and critically also able to demonstrate a more positive social environmental impact. So that could, for example, be that you are a certified B Corp, or something similar, or are working towards that status. So in terms of eligible activities, for the scale-ups, I've talked about access to finance and investment readiness support. The grants can be used to fund consultancy to support your preparations for accessing finance, or consultancy or other support to help your business become investment ready. So provided whatever activity you're undertaking with the grant is going to enable you to access finance, or is going to enable you to be in a position where you can access finance, so i.e. making you investment ready, then it will be eligible for eScalate. Clearly, it is absolutely critical that because this covers a wide range of potential activities, you articulate very clearly in your application how the activities that you plan to undertake will enable you to access finance or will result in the business being investment ready. The other side of the programme, the Enterprises for Social Good side of the programme, has a much wider range of eligible activities. Clearly, the access to finance and investment readiness activities are also eligible for Enterprises for Social Good. But beyond that, grants can fund redesign of a business model, new products and service development and piloting, plans for exporting or diversification in product and service ranges, addressing barriers to growth. So there is really a wide range of activities, or a much wider range of activities, that Enterprises for Social Good can apply for. The critical thing here when writing the application is to demonstrate that the grant project for which you're seeking support will achieve one of the following objectives. So objectives, either increasing sales, improving productivity and profitability, improvement to the business processes, or the creation of new jobs within the business. So how does it work? I've talked about the grant rate being 50%, and this slide just sets out how that works in practice. So the grant offer, total eligible spend of £10,000, maximum grant offered is £5,000. That's 50% of the total spend. We've then got two scenarios because in the real world, it's very rare that grant projects pan out in exactly the same way as a grant offer letter. So in scenario number one, your total eligible spend is 8,000, so you've underspent against your grant offer letter. The maximum grant we can pay out is therefore £4,000, which is 50% of the £8,000 that you spent. Okay, so in this instance, the grant is lower than the maximum grant that we offered because it's capped at 50% of the eligible spend. The second scenario, the total eligible spend is 12,000. So in this case, the grant project has overspent against its £10,000 total eligible spend. In this case, the maximum grant that we can pay out is limited to £5,000 because that is the maximum cash value grant that we offered. So a grant through eScalate will be limited to either the maximum grant value that we offer or 50% of the total eligible spend, whichever is lower. So who can actually receive one of these grants? SME, so a small, medium-sized enterprise, is the target audience for these grants. So these are businesses that have less than 250 employees. They are not more than 25% owned by a business that is not itself an SME. There are some exceptions to that. So, for example, venture capitalist companies, universities which own significant parts of spin-out businesses are in many cases not captured by that 25% ownership rule. If in doubt, if you think that you are potentially captured or affected by being owned by a business that is that owns, say, 30% and is not an SME, please speak to the team. Okay. It's fairly complicated, but we can help you understand where you sit on the eligibility line, whether you're on the yes side or the no side. The other thing to note is that if you are owned by a business that is itself an SME, so if you're part of a group of businesses, the eligibility for SME criteria looks at the entire group of businesses. So if you have 100 employees, you are owned by another SME that has 151 employees, then for the purposes of the eligibility test, there are 251 employees, therefore a large company, so not eligible. So you need to be aware about the relationship between different businesses in a group. The other two elements of the SME eligibility check are the turnover and balance sheet. Turnover should be less than 50 million euros in your most recent published accounts, or a balance sheet of less than 43 million euros. Again, in the most recent published set of accounts. Undertakings in difficulty. So an undertaking in difficulty is something that we cannot support with European funding. This does not include any business that's less than 3 years old. And an undertaking in difficulty is defined effectively as a business that is either subject to insolvency, that's a fairly clear definition, or in receipt of rescue or restructuring aid. Well, to be fair, you would know if you were in receipt of rescue or restructuring aid. So again, that's very clear. Or is a limited or unlimited liability company that has lost more than half of its subscribed share capital as a result of accumulated losses. Okay. These are the elements of the definition that become a little bit more complicated, and I do have a table underneath where I run through some examples, but it's quite important to note that the undertaking difficulty test was relaxed for businesses due to the COVID pandemic. So it's quite important that we look at the age and financial position of the business at December 2019, i.e. at a point before COVID kind of affected the business, because effectively, if you are undertaking in difficulty as a result of the pandemic, you should not be precluded from accessing support. This is an external factor. It's not your fault as a business, and therefore you shouldn't be disadvantaged as a result of that. If in doubt, please contact the team on the eScalate@oxlep.com email address, and we can help you through it. So the table at the bottom of the slide gives a couple of examples of how this test works, where it has to be applied. So if you've got capital of 10,000, no losses at all on your books, you pass the test. Absolutely fine. Capital of £10,000, accumulated losses £4,999. That means your remaining capital is £5,001, therefore you pass the test. If, however, against that original £10,000 of capital, your accumulated losses are £5,001, for example, you would fail the test. And that's because your remaining capital is only £4,999. So it is less than 50% of the original capital. And then clearly original capital 10,000, accumulated losses 15,000, you would fail the test. The last two rows on the spreadsheet reflect the situation that you often come across with social enterprises for a social purpose, or any business where there is no share capital per se. If you have zero share capital, an accumulated loss of even £1 results in failing the undertaking difficulty test. It is a very clear pass-fail, a very clear yes-no test. It's a line in the sand. I've been known to describe it as a blunt instrument for assessing whether a business is actually in difficulty or not. But the line has to be drawn somewhere. And this is the place that all the member states, including the UK, decided that they wanted to draw the line for the regulations. It is therefore a very simple calculation, and it's based on your last full year of accounts, specifically the balance sheet, as submitted to Companies House. If it is too early for you to have ever submitted any accounts to Companies House, you're less than 3 years old and the test won't apply to you. When you signed up to the eScalate program, you will have completed a self-declaration within your sign-up form that confirms you are not an undertaking difficulty. And it's worth noting that we're obliged to formally check whether or not you pass or fail this test if anyone is applying for more than £50,000 worth of aid, which is not going to be the situation for eScalate. But otherwise, we have to do random spot checks. So we do need to check these things. It's critical, therefore, that if you're in any doubt, you speak to your accountant. On the little formula that I've written there, capital plus profit and loss needs to be greater than or equal to capital divided by 2 is a fairly simple formula for checking how you do on this test. Again, if in doubt, contact the team and ask. So one of the key eligibility issues around eScalate grants, the first and most obvious one is that there are no staff costs allowed with eScalate grants. Staff costs, salary costs are not eligible. Anybody that you pay that attracts national insurance, pension contributions, anyone that goes through PAYE is not an eligible cost. VAT costs can only be included if you are not registered for VAT or if you can't recover VAT costs relating to your project from HMRC for whatever reason. So you are allowed to include VAT, but only if it cannot be recovered from any other source. It is important here that if you're in any doubt as to the VAT status or the VAT treatment of your grant, you should seek advice. OxLEP is not a team of VAT experts, and we cannot give tax advice. You should seek advice from your accountant or whoever manages your VAT returns for the business. Procurement, audit trail, and receiving 3 quotes. Given that no staff costs are allowed, businesses will be procuring activities, consultants, pieces of kit and so on in order to make up the costs of the grant project. It is absolutely critical for us that we have an audit trail of those procurements and that 3 quotes are provided where 3 quotes are required. There does need to be an open procurement for anything that costs over £24,999, so 25,000 upwards. This then requires an advert on Contracts Finder, a formal specification, scoring of responses, notification and feedback to successful and unsuccessful applicants, and so on. Given the cap of £12,500 grant on each eScalate application, meaning a £25,000 total cost, it is unlikely that anything over £24,999 will need to be procured. It's not impossible. If, for example, your project was a part of a larger project and you were procuring a consultant for £50,000, for example, 24,999 relates to the eScalate grant, you would have to do an open procurement because the total value of your procurement would be higher than the procurement threshold for advertising. Other eligibility issues that we come up with are selected suppliers who are already involved in an applicant's business. That's not to say that you cannot use suppliers that you've used before. You can, but you have to demonstrate that you've been through a fair and transparent open process to seek quotes and that you've made a decision based upon the information provided within those quotes. Oh, but I always use them is not a procurement justification. We also sometimes have issues around defrayal. The eScalate grants are paid out on the basis of defrayed expenditure. So that means that in order for you to submit a grant claim to OxLEP and to receive your grant payment, you have to have paid out 100% of the grant costs being claimed. So both the ERDF grant amount and your own match amount. Okay, and you need to provide us with evidence that it has been defrayed so that the cash, the money, has left your bank account. Now, the areas where we tend to find issues are where people use credit cards or where they use overseas bank accounts. There is no reason why you can't pay for goods or services that are part of an eScalate grant project using your credit card. You can, it's absolutely fine. The issue comes when we need to demonstrate that the costs being claimed have been defrayed, so have actually been paid. When you pay for something using a credit card, you as a business do not defray that cost. Your credit card provider, the bank, defrays that cost and effectively lends you the money until the point at which you repay the credit card. So the defrayal evidence for a credit card transaction is not only the invoice and the evidence of credit card payments, the credit card bill, but also a copy of a bank statement showing a transfer of funds to that credit card, and it has to be for at least the same value as the amount being claimed. So we have to be able to demonstrate to an auditor that cash left a bank account in at least the same value as that being claimed. Similarly, there are issues with overseas bank accounts. Now, it's not to say you can't use an overseas bank account to pay overseas suppliers. In fact, it makes some sense if you have a euro or a dollar account with a balance in it. You can save some transaction costs by using the balance in that account to pay suppliers in that particular currency. The issue that we have with that approach is that although we can demonstrate defrayal, so the money has left a company bank account, what we can't necessarily demonstrate easily is the sterling value of that transaction. When you pay an overseas bill from a UK bank account, a sterling denominated bank account, part of the transaction details will include the euro value or the dollar value or the other currency value and an exchange rate that's been applied and details of any fees. So it's very easy to break down and cross-match a euro amount, say, with a sterling amount being paid from a bank account. If you use an overseas bank account, there is no direct link within the evidence and the audit trail between the amount that you defrayed in euros, for example, and the amount that is then being included in your claim in pounds sterling. So what you need to do there is to ensure that you are using a recognised European Central Bank exchange rate as the reference rate for that transaction. If in doubt, please ask the team. We can advise on the best place to find that rate. There's a difference, of course, between revenue and capital costs. So a revenue cost is any individual item that happens to cost less than 4,999 excluding VAT. So when I say item, I am actually meaning a thing. So not a service. So if you have a consultant who costs £10,000, that is a revenue cost. If, however, you are buying, I don't know, a 3D printer and it costs you £4,900 in ERDF land, that would be classed as a revenue cost, but it would be a mobile asset. Come on to that in a moment. But if your 3D printer costs you £5,010, then it is a capital item. So a mobile asset, that's anything between £1,000 and £4,999, excluding VAT, has a special definition as a mobile asset. So that's something that is not big enough to be deemed a full capital asset, but it's something that is accepted as being a larger capital purchase than a sort of standard revenue cost. All mobile assets need to be recorded in the project asset register. Now that includes the sort of details that you would always expect to go along with things, the date purchased, the price, the depreciation, reference numbers, so barcode numbers, registration numbers, model numbers, that sort of thing, but also photos to demonstrate where the mobile asset is. Because don't forget, if you're buying a 3D printer as part of a grant application, you will have told us essentially where it will be and what you will be doing with it. And the photographs provided of the asset will be able to demonstrate to an auditor that, yes, the 3D printer is sitting in the factory being used for the purposes for which it was purchased. Any item that costs over £5,000 is in ERDF land a real, proper capital item, and it can only be included if capital spend is explicitly allowed in your grant agreement. So what are the things that we can't fund? I've talked a little bit about staff costs. So any salary costs, anything that goes through PAYE that attracts NI and pension payments is not eligible. We can't fund travel and expenses costs, nor can we fund VAT payments that you can recover from HMRC. VAT you cannot recover, for example, because you're not VAT registered, is eligible. We can't cover interest costs, so no debt or refinancing costs, nor can we cover the costs relating to any statutory or legislative requirement. So if, for example, it is a legal requirement to have a certain certification, and you want consultancy in order to achieve that certification, that is not an eligible cost because it is a legal requirement to have that certification. If, however, there is certification that is not a legal requirement, but that would, for example, make you more attractive to an investor, that is absolutely an eligible cost because it is not a legal requirement. It's optional. The programme is not allowed to subsidise the meeting of legal statutory requirements. We can't fund training, and that's because the Regional Development Fund is the business-focused fund of the European Union. It's the European Social Fund that funds training. So when we say training, we think anything effectively that leads to some kind of qualification. Now, this doesn't include things like leadership and management development. So something like mentoring is a perfectly eligible activity under ERDF. We can't fund vehicle purchases or any hire purchase arrangements, hire purchase because they include interest costs. So we talked about debt and refinancing earlier on the slide. And vehicle purchases are so important that I put them in there twice. This is deliberate. It's because when people come and do audits of Oxfordshire, vehicle purchases is one of the things that they look for. There was an old Oxfordshire project that had an underspend one year and decided the best way to deal with its underspend was to go out and buy a car. Given that this was not allowed, the auditors were, shall we say, unimpressed when they came to do the audit. And because it is still the same auditors coming out to see projects many years later, they still do check for vehicle purchases. It's something that they ask when they come out to Oxfordshire, because there is a history, there's a precedence for Oxfordshire projects going and buying cars. We cannot fund like for like or routine replacement for things. So if, for example, you've decided that a critical part of your project is a laptop, and you're going to buy exactly the same laptop, same make, model, capacity and everything as the one that you currently have, because it's worn out. So it's a routine replacement, it's worn out, so I need a new one. And there is no added value from that replacement, then that will not be eligible. There is no added value. There is no difference from the laptop that you have to the laptop that you're going to have. They're exactly the same. There needs to be that element of added value there. For a very similar reason, we can't fund preventative or remedial maintenance. Okay, so my machine needs servicing because I think it's going to break down. That is not something that we can fund. Okay, there's no added value in that, because frankly, the view of the programme is that that is the sort of thing that businesses should be funding themselves. Okay, the result of that work is that the machine will still be working, but still be able to do exactly the same as what it did before. There is nothing additional as a result of the funding. We can't fund the building or refurbishment of retail facilities. We just can't. And because the aid is given under the de minimis European state aid exemption, there are some specific sectors that we can't support. So that's farms and fish farms, so the primary production of agricultural goods and fisheries or aquaculture. It is worth checking with the team if you think you might fall into any of these categories, because they are quite wide-ranging. Some initial processing of products is allowed and some isn't. So, for example, a fruit farm is definitely ineligible. Making something out of the apples that you grow on that fruit farm, depending on what you make and the processes that they go through, may or may not be eligible. So it's worth checking with us if you think there's any doubt about whether you're eligible. We can't support the road freight sector. We can't support services of general economic interest. So that's organisations like OxLEP, the sort of things that we do, or schools or the NHS. We can't support businesses with export related activities. Now, that doesn't mean that we can't support you with projects that result in products and services that you then export. It means that we can't explicitly help you to set up export related supply chains and logistics plans. Clearly, nor can we fund activities that favour domestic over imported goods. We do, of course, have to report on a series of deliverables with the eScalate grants. So there's the amount of grant paid out. Well, that's Fairly easy. We know exactly how much that is. We paid you the grant. Is the amount of match that you've put into the grant project. Again, we know from your claim exactly how much this is. We have to report the employment increase. So this is the number of new jobs created. Have to be very careful with this one because it is an employment increase. And what that means is that to measure this, the business is saying that at the point when I signed up to the eScalate program, I had 10 jobs. As a result of participation in the eScalate program, I now have 12 jobs. Thanks to the support from eScalate, I have increased the number of jobs in my business by 1 or 2. So it's the number of jobs that have increased from the point at which you joined the eScalate program and the number of jobs that are as a result of the support eScalate has given you. We have to report new products to the firm. If they're new to the market, hopefully they're also new to the firm because it's the new to the firm products that have to be reported. Products or services new to the firm don't have to be sold. They don't have to be out for sale in the market yet. They just have to be things that the business did not have prior to the support. And we need to report the number of new businesses that we've supported. That's fairly straightforward. We can track that from Companies House. It's basically businesses that are less than a year old when they start their support. With all of these things, some kind of evidence is needed. And as you can imagine, a compliance person saying, there's the form for all of these. So how do you apply? You can read the guidance on the website. It's been updated for the March closure date. You can speak to the team, contact them through the escalate@oxfordshirelep.com email address. Fill out the application form using the guidance. It does give advice on the sort of content that we're looking for and how it will be scored. And use the application checklist. It's extremely helpful. I know it is, I wrote it. And then once you've submitted before the deadline, and the deadline is always midday on a Friday, in this case, the 11th of March, just wait and see. Okay, wait until the notification date, and you should hear on or before that date. So what are the rules that we have to follow? I've talked about defrayal issues earlier. We can only reimburse based on defrayed expenditure, so that's money that has come out of your business bank account that you incur after the date of the grant offer letter. Okay, so when you have a grant offer letter, make sure you understand the date at which expenditure can be incurred. It is usually the date of the offer letter. So if your offer letter says expenditure can be incurred from the 2nd of February, for example, you go out and spend £5,000 on the grant project on the 1st of February, we will not be able to repay any grant in respect of that £5,000 because it predated the date of the grant offer letter. If you go and spend that £5,000 on the 2nd or 3rd of February, no problem at all. It's got to be incurred on or after the date of the grant offer letter. Procurement rules, we're definitely going to be in the 3 quotes area, I would think, for all of the grant applications. So that means we do need to see 3 quotes, 3 comparable quotes, 3 current quotes. Okay, so that's quotes that are, to the best of your knowledge and our knowledge, still valid. So if somebody quoted something for you in February 2021 and you submit it as one of the 3 quotes alongside your grant application in March 2022, it will not be accepted. Okay, unless you can demonstrate that that quote is still valid, you would need to go out and find a current quote for comparative purposes. As we go through all of this, evidence is critical. We're subject to very rigorous audits, and we seem to draw a short straw at the randomized audits. We've had one after the other at one point last year, and it's absolutely critical that we have full audit trails, full evidence trails to demonstrate what we did, how we did it, and that the rules were followed. So at this point, when I used to deliver a webinar to a live audience, I would stop and ask whether people thought we were flexible or rigid. And I like to say we are as flexible as we can be within a very rigid framework. So now I'm going to move on to the second part of the presentation, which is about why applications are unsuccessful. Anyone who has been to OxLEP grant webinars before will have heard the following slides, so do feel free to turn off now. Anyone else, I deliver a session on why applications are unsuccessful, deliberately pitched that way round. Grant applications are competitive processes, and it depends very much what is received on the day as to how easy or difficult it may be to be successful. So you could write a grant application that has nothing wrong in it. It just happens that other applications were a better fit to the program at that time. So you might not have done anything wrong, but you may still be unsuccessful. If I delivered a session called How to Make an Application Successful, you could do everything I tell you to do and still not be successful, because there may be applications that the panel think are stronger. So they have more added value, offer more deliverables, whatever it may be. So I try and draw on far too many years of running grant programs and assessing grant applications to try and draw out the key errors that people make within grant applications. So the things that are likely to disadvantage you if you do them. So the first one there is length. And I always say think Goldilocks when talking about length. Your application should be neither too short nor too long. It should be just right. Okay, it needs to be long enough to tell the assessors everything that they need to know in order to assess. And it should therefore not be so short that the assessors are missing a load of information that they need. I say at this point that we do give word limits. I think it's word limits on the eScalate grant applications, but they are not targets. If you can say everything that you need to say, everything that you need to tell the assessors in order to understand and score your application against the stated criteria, there is no requirement to use up the vast majority of the words available. What I tend to say to that is that if you can write your grant application in 2 pages, 2.5 pages, that's fine, well done. If you've written a paragraph, it is almost certainly too short. It is almost certainly missing critical information and critical depth to enable assessors to award high scores. When you write an application, don't be obtuse. What does that mean? Don't use long, complicated words like obtuse. It's better to keep it clear and simple. Okay. Those reading the applications, the assessors, are unlikely to be the experts in your business. You are. After all, they're your business. It is your business. It is very easy to drift into acronyms and very complicated technical explanations for different elements of your business. It is unlikely that an assessor will have a similar technical background to you, and therefore it is more likely that if you go too far into the complexities, an assessor will not be able to understand the application. And as an assessor, it is very difficult to award high marks to something that you do not understand. I once saw an application that had devoted almost an entire page to chemical formulas and calculations to try and explain how their particular product worked. The space could have been put to much better use than including that level of detail. Think about the style in which it's written. I say spell checker is there for a reason. Please use the spell checker and the editor within Word. I always make the point that no application will be rejected on the basis of spelling and grammar, unless, of course, it's incomprehensible to the assessor. But an application that has significant spelling errors, significant grammatical issues and errors in it, it just sows a seed in the assessor's mind that not an awful lot of care and attention has been given to the application. It doesn't put an assessor in a good mindset for awarding high scores. And very much linked to that are issues around quality. Take your time when you're writing an application. I always say that if you're starting an application with 2 weeks, 2.5 weeks before the deadline, you're fine. You have the time to do a good job, to take your time, to think about it, to go away, to come back to it, review it, all the rest of it. If the deadline is the 11th of March and you are picking up the pen or picking up the keyboard to start typing on the 9th of March, realistically, you've left it too late. You're not going to have enough time to produce an application that is of sufficiently high quality to be awarded high marks. When you've read enough applications over the years, it is always very clear which ones have been rushed at the last minute, because there tends to be, important information missing. I would say use our checking service, but I've already noted that unfortunately we can't offer that. But please get somebody to check it for you. Have somebody with a fresh pair of eyes, preferably from within the business, or if necessary outside, read through your application and see if it makes sense, see if they can understand it. Please make sure your application is consistent. The application asks in a couple of different places for certain bits of information, for example, how much grant you're requesting. Applications can be unsuccessful because they are not internally consistent. If an application is asking for £10,000 on page 3, it needs to also ask for £10,000 on pages 7, 10, 11 and 12. If it asks for £10,000 in one place, £8,000 somewhere else, £12,000 somewhere else, it is very difficult for an assessor to be sure what the figure is that they're scoring. And that can make quite a difference to the value for money considerations. It also, going back to the spell checker, raises concerns about how much attention to detail has been put into the grant application. Applications can be unsuccessful because people don't fill them in. Fill everything in. If there is a box in there and it is blank, ask yourself whether you could put not applicable in there and it still makes sense. Have I explored any other sources of funding? Could you put not applicable in there? You could. It would be better to put yes or no in there. And then the following box, what sources of funding have you explored? Then you can put a not applicable in it. If, however, the question is, what grant rate are you requesting, or what is the value of the grant you're requesting, You can't leave that box blank. You can't put not applicable in it and it still makes sense. People do miss things out. So it's a check that's worth doing. In terms of the content, applications can often be unsuccessful because they assume prior knowledge. They assume that there is a degree of background knowledge and information that assessors have about a product or a service or a business or a market that assessors just do not have. If you find yourself thinking, oh, well, it goes without saying that, it never does. Put it in. Do not assume that an assessor has any prior knowledge about your business. As I said before, you're the experts in the business. An assessor isn't. If you assume prior knowledge, an application is more likely to be unsuccessful because it will be marked down for making or appearing to make unsupported assumptions. Applicant is assuming that the market needs this product. You as the applicant may know perfectly well that the market needs the product and can quote loads of examples and evidence for that. But if it is not in the application, it's not something an assessor will see. When you're thinking about content, applications don't always follow the logical process of start at the beginning, go on to the middle, and finish at the end. So what do I mean by that? I mean that the beginning is to describe the company and to set the context. This is what we do. This is what we need to do. This is the position at the moment. The middle is, and this means that this is the grant project that we need to conduct, and this is how we will do it. And the end of it is then, and this is the impact that it will have. Understandably, applicants are very excited about the grant project element of the business. After all, that's what the application is about. So quite frequently, applications are unsuccessful because the people writing them have jumped straight into the grant project and what they plan to do with the grant and forgotten to set the context, forgotten to explain why it is relevant to the business, to give the background on the business, and sometimes even not to say what impact it will have on the business. Similarly, the content needs to be relevant. Applications can be unsuccessful because 75% of the answers to the questions are not actually related to what the question was asking for. So it does need to be relevant. You are, after all, telling us a story. This is a terrible phrase that I still, after many years, haven't found a better one. But you're telling us a story. What is it that the assessor needs to know in order to award high marks? If you don't tell an assessor what they need to know in order to award high marks, they can't award the high marks. And in terms of content, there is always the perennial question around the use of attachments and additional documents. There are some things that we specifically ask for. Okay, so you are requested to provide a business plan. You are requested to provide previous accounts if you have any. And if you fail to provide those, it is an eligibility issue. We will come out and request them. And if you don't provide them, then the application will not proceed. You can, however, you have the flexibility to use additional attachments, additional documents to provide additional evidence, additional background, supporting information. This is fine, but it does need to be done with caution. Applications can be unsuccessful because they rely to too great an extent on the content of significantly sized attachments. So what I mean by that is that if you're going to supply an attachment and it is 25 pages long, that is longer than the application form itself and is definitely longer than the bits of the application form that the assessor will focus on. They're not going to focus particularly on the declarations at the back. other than to make sure it's signed. They're not going to focus on the company name and address on the first page, not necessarily even on the public summary. It's the questions within the application form that are focused on. And if you provide an attachment that is longer than the application form itself, and you rely on an assessor having read the whole of that attachment as well as the application form, you really are, I'm afraid, setting yourself up to fail. Assessors always have limited time. It goes with the job. Assessors never have as much time as they would like to do an assessment. So they do not have time to go through multiple copies of multi-page attachments. If you submit one or two attachments of a couple of pages each, it's likely an assessor will look at them, glance through them, especially if they're primarily diagrams and pictures rather than close type text. If you must provide 25, 50-page attachments, it's very important that you tell the assessor where to look. So cross-reference. Applications will be unsuccessful if they say, as demonstrated by Annex A, all 200 pages of Annex A, you can see that the market is very strong. That would require an assessor to read 200 pages of Annex A, which an assessor will not have time to do. If you must attach the 200 pages of Annex A, cross-reference it, tell the assessor which page to look at. As demonstrated by pages 2 to 3 of Annex A, for example. If you do that, there is far more chance and likelihood that an assessor will be able to look at those elements that you want them to look at, and that will be part of the scoring. So be wary using additional attachments and documents. In terms of process, RTQ, this stands for read the question. We do provide guidance on the sort of things that we're looking for within the answers to the questions. So please make sure that you read and understand what it is we're actually asking for in the application. And then link to that one, ATQ, which is answer the question. It's critical that once you've read and understood the question, you then make sure that your answer addresses the critical issues that the question is looking for. If you answer a different question, if you answer a question that you would have liked to have been asked, rather than the question that was actually asked in the application form, it is very difficult for an assessor to award high marks because the assessment criteria are based on the questions that have been asked. Okay, and those are the ones that need to be answered. Similarly, 3 quotes means 3 quotes. It means we expect to see 3 different valid current quotes. If it really is impossible, then there would be some kind of confirmation from companies that you've approached that they can't quote. The ideal situation, to be fair, I've never seen it, is a quote from a company and 2 responses from other companies that say something along the lines of, we can't do this, we can't think of anybody who could do this other than company A. And company A is the one company that's quoted. Now, over the years, I have had to admit that there are situations in which it is not possible to get more than 1 quote. Facebook advertising, for example, is a case in point. If Facebook advertising is part of your project, the place that you get a quote for advertising on Facebook from tends to be Facebook. Leave aside the fact that marketing consultancies might be able to give you a quote that includes Facebook advertising. If you directly wish to do your advertising through Facebook, you will have 1 quote, and that will be from Facebook. In that situation, we're willing to accept that it's a single quote. So please don't Please don't try and justify that. But also remember that we are looking for 3 quotes. And if you only have 2 quotes, what will happen is that the application is likely to go to panel, but it would be approved, if it is approved, on condition that the 3rd quote is made available. Businesses that think, but I'm different. I understand that for everyone else, but I'm different. It's not the same for me. After many, many years of assessing applications, there are enough similarities, shall we say, between businesses that means that they can all follow the process, that you can seek these quotes. And saying, well, we've worked with them before. Well, that's exactly the point about competition. The whole point is that this is public money being paid out as a grant, and there is a requirement to ensure that that public money is fairly and transparently spent. So it cannot just be given always to the same people that you give contracts to. That's the whole point. And if you go out and seek quotes, it's possible you will find a better supplier, a cheaper supplier, a supplier that can do more than the current. So there are some potential benefits from this. So lastly, once you have a grant, please wait until the grant has been awarded before spending. Talked about that in reference to not defraying money before the grant offer letter says you can. Please then actually spend it. So deliver the grant project, make the expenditure as described in your application form and grant offer letter, and then claim it. I've been running grant schemes for upwards of 20 years now, and it still surprises me that even when a business will spend the money, so the match and the grant that they haven't covered yet, they then don't claim the grant. They're very slow in submitting the grant claim to actually get the money back. It always strikes me as being the most important part of a grant process. You spend the money, then as soon as possible, you as a business will want the money back from the funder. And to be fair, the funder is very keen to pay that money out to you. So please claim it as soon as you can. Having said that, we do understand that these grants take place in the real world. Things happen, he says. Anything from delays, changes, illnesses, pandemics, things happen and things change. If there are delays, if things change, please keep the team informed. Let us know. Okay, if you let us know what's happening, then we can work with you to make sure that the grant and the grant project remain as effectively set up for you as they can be. Please don't make a change and then tell us what you've done. If you put a claim in and the expenditure is different, so you've decided that actually you go with a supplier that you didn't get a quote from as part of the original application, and at no point have you notified the team, there will be a delay in processing that claim because it is not in line with the grant offer letter. And we have to go through a whole approval process to ensure we're able to pay that claim. So let the team know. It's one of those situations where it is far better to ask for permission than for forgiveness. And lastly, please provide the necessary evidence with the claim. So as well as the claim that you put in, there will be elements of evidence that go with it. This includes things like evidence of defrayal, so copies of bank statements, redacted as necessary, but copies demonstrating funds leaving a bank account, copies of the invoices that support that defrayal. Please make sure that is provided with your claim. If it isn't, the claim will be sent back to you with a request to provide that information. We cannot process and approve a claim without the full audit trail being in place. The reason for that is that the way we run the scheme is to try and ensure that when the auditors come out, they stop with us. There should be no requirement for an auditor to go down to see one of the grant recipients, because we should have sufficient evidence, sufficient audit trail at our level to satisfy an auditor. So for more information, you're welcome to watch this recording again. The slides and the guidance notes will be published on the OxLEP website, which will be how you've accessed this recording. And we do provide frequently asked questions. So any questions and answers submitted to the eScalate@oxfordshirelep.com email address will be collated. They'll be anonymised. So please try to ask anonymous questions, but we will publish the questions and the answers given to ensure that all applicants have access to the same information, so there is no advantage given to any specific applicant. Everyone needs to have the same access to information for it to be a fair and transparent process. Thank you very much. Questions, please email them to the address on the previous slide. And thank you very much for your time, and good luck with your eScalate grant applications.